So Ethan Klein just dropped a content nuke on Hasan Piker, and honestly, it was long overdue. These two went from being casual acquaintances to co-hosting Leftovers, a show where Ethan played the role of the slightly skeptical guy trying to figure out if his co-host was just really passionate about politics or if he was 2 rants away from starting a cult. At first, it probably seemed harmless, just some good old left-wing banter, but as time went on, it became increasingly clear that Hasan wasn't just some loud-mouthed progressive. He was a full-blown extremist cosplaying as a Democrat. Now, I've been critical of Hasan for years, so have plenty of others, but here's the thing. This time, it's coming from Ethan, a guy who actually sat next to Hasan, nodded along, and for a while pretended like the dude wasn't out of his mind. Ethan gave him a platform, and now, like a scientist who accidentally spilled toxic waste on a regular turtle and ended up with an angry, brainwashed Donatello who hates the West, he's realizing he made a mistake. And look, I don't agree with Ethan on a lot. He's a social democrat. I'm not. But his takedown of Hasan, that's not a left versus right thing. It's about basic human-level sanity. It's about calling out a guy who unironically thinks America is worse than literal terrorist organizations. It's about acknowledging that at some point, leftist stops meaning progressive and starts meaning brain-meltingly stupid. And for Ethan to be the one making that point, that's significant. So today we're going to go through how this bromance fell apart, why Ethan's critique matters, and why Hasan is basically the YouTube equivalent of a college freshman who just read Noam Chomsky for the first time and now thinks he's an expert on geopolitics. Let's get into it. Now, from the start, Ethan sets the tone. Hasan isn't just an edgy leftist. He's a full-time apologist for the worst people on earth. The guy doesn't just flirt with bad takes. He takes them out to dinner, buys them flowers, and introduces them to his parents. America deserved 9/11. Yeah, this is Hasan's idea of witty banter. Kill them in a video game. Classic Hasanism. And somehow, this is the guy Ethan co-hosted a show with for 2 years. Ethan admits he should have seen the red flags, but when you're busy laughing at right-wing freakouts, it's easy to miss the fact that your co-host is out here calling Crimea a justifiable annexation. Oh, and saying China did Tibet a favor. That's right. Tibet didn't get invaded. They got a gift. A really aggressive, really authoritarian, concentration camps included kind of gift. Isn't that nice? But wait, there's more. Hasan also defends the Uyghur genocide. Yep, full send. Straight up repeats CCP propaganda, says the concentration camps were just re-education centers and that they've closed now, so no big deal. Ethan pulls out the receipts, pointing to AP reports to say China's got the highest prison rate in the world, and Hasan shrugs, moves on. The camps were different vibes now. Different vibes. Oh, the vibes. At this point, Ethan is staring at the camera like Jim from The Office, like, what the actual fuck? And then October 7th happens. Hasan's chat immediately turns into a festival of anti-Semitism. And Hasan goes, there's nothing I can do, bro. Oh, really? Because Ethan has seen Hasan ban people for way less. Everybody has seen him do that, the double standard of banning somebody who criticizes him, but not somebody who is clearly hateful. So if you even give so much of a hint of being a lib in his chat and you're yeeted into the void, but people screaming, Zionist baby killer, that stays. Suddenly Hasan forgets how moderation works. And then there's the real mask-off moment. Hasan laughs at the idea of Israelis being slaughtered at a festival, calls them hipsters, says babies in settlements are baby settlers, like that somehow justifies targeting them. And when they discuss reports of sexual violence in this situation, Hasan diminishes it. Acts ambivalent. All of a sudden, his leftist brain doesn't care about believe all women. At this point, Ethan is fully realizing what he's been sitting next to for 2 years. This isn't about leftist politics. It's about a guy who will excuse literally anything as long as it aligns with his worldview. Terror, excusable. Genocide, rebranded as education. Dictatorships, well, much better than capitalism. And Ethan, well, he's done. Not just because Hasan is a brain-rotted apologist for authoritarianism, but because he manipulated Ethan's audience into a full-blown communist pipeline. Hasan lied about his views from the start, pretended to be a normal social democrat, and used Leftovers, the show he had with Ethan, to radicalize liberals into full-throated tankies. And Ethan, well, he played a role in mainstreaming this bullshit. So now, he's making it right. And this time, it's war. Nuclear war, to be exact. Mutually assured destruction? Perhaps. And Hasan, well, he's the first one getting vaporized. Ethan then lays it all out. Hasan is basically Twitch's top propagandist for rebranding terrorism. Picture Twitch HQ, but instead of banning streamers for saying mean words, they're throwing a corporate party for Hasan's terrorism, but make a sheet campaign. Hasan's front and center, repackaging anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism so cleanly, even the anime-obsessed, terminally online kids are eating it up. This guy's out here making global jihadists relatable like he's running the Mr. Beast of terrorist PR. And he's not even subtle about it. His defense of Hamas, embarrassing. His whitewashing of the Uyghur genocide, hilarious if it wasn't so horrifying. And his absolutely deranged cheerleading of the Houthis, that's when it goes from cringe to borderline war crimes. So let's talk about that, because this might be the most absurd part. Hasan watches literal Houthi propaganda and goes, bro, they're so musical. Musical? My guy, these are the same people blocking food shipments, bombing civilians, and running a nice little side hustle in slavery. But nah, to Hasan, they're just Hamilton with AK-47s. And it gets better. He interviews a literal Houthi rebel, drooling over him like a fangirl at a BTS concert. When people call him out, oh no, suddenly the guy is just some TikTok kid from Yemen. Meanwhile, the TikTok kid is out here tweeting about putting Jews on pikes and writing fan fiction about martyrdom. But sure, let's pretend he's just a misunderstood influencer like Logan Paul, but with significantly more war crimes. Then we get Hasan's next level propaganda for the Houthis. He straight up lies about them. They only attack Israeli ships. False. They only target bad guys. False. They operate in their own waters. False. The reality, they hijacked a ship that had nothing to do with Israel, kidnapped the entire crew, and vanished them for a year. But in Hasan's world, that's just a deterrent. Right. Just like OJ was simply introducing his wife to the pointy edge of a knife. And of course, when Ethan calls all of this out, Hasan melts down like a toddler who just found out his favorite anime got canceled. He immediately pivots to Gaza, his classic Uno reverse card for dodging criticism. Why are we focusing on me when genocide is happening? Bro, because you're out here playing hype man for a terrorist group like DJ Khaled at a hostage-taking contest. And speaking of hostage-taking, Hasan's journalistic approach to his Houthi rebel interview is breathtaking. The hard-hitting questions, does he know what One Piece is? That's it. That's the Pulitzer-winning moment. Hasan could have had bin Laden on 9/12, and his first question would have been, yo, what's your Hogwarts house? Then we reach the most deranged moment of all. Hasan actually unironically compares his little Houthi TikTok twink to Anne Frank. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, because when Anne Frank was hiding in an attic, she definitely spent time tweeting, Tel Aviv will burn, and photoshopping Jews onto medieval torture devices. Absolutely the same. Totally identical. Not at all a false equivalence. Like the falsest of false equivalences. Anyway, Ethan absolutely shreds Hasan for this because, let's be honest, Hasan isn't some brilliant socialist thinker. He's not even a leftist in any coherent way. He's just a guy whose entire worldview boils down to America bad. Anyone who opposes America, good. And if that means caping for terrorist groups, dictatorships, and actual genocides, he'll do it with a smile. Guess you learned that from Nancy Pelosi. And the best part, Twitch doesn't care. Dude could literally live stream a terrorist training camp and they'd probably just boost him to the front page. But if you call him out, now you're the problem. Ethan sums it up perfectly. Hasan isn't just a propagandist. He's an active participant. He's not just reporting on these groups. He's giving them a makeover, slapping a fresh coat of paint on genocidal regimes and selling them to his audience like a deranged car salesman. At this point, you almost have to respect the grift. Keyword almost. But nah, even that would be too generous because Hasan isn't just some clueless moron stumbling into propaganda. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's not accidentally playing Houthi musical theater or accidentally downplaying genocide. He's choosing to do it. He's just mad that people finally started noticing. So yeah, Ethan went in, and honestly, it was hilarious, but also terrifying because the fact that a guy this fundamentally brain dead still has a massive audience, that's the real horror in this story. Next, Ethan dives into how Hasan talks about Hezbollah like they're just a misunderstood after-school club with a passion for community service. You know, the kind of group that doesn't hijack planes, assassinate prime ministers, and indiscriminately fire thousands of rockets into civilian areas. Except they do, because Hezbollah is a full-blown, internationally recognized terrorist organization, not just according to the US, but the EU, the Arab League, and basically everyone else who isn't a lunatic with a Hezbollah flag hanging in the bedroom. And yet, when the topic comes up, Hasan, the guy who claims to be all about nuance and understanding, suddenly forgets how to read a room. Ethan pulls up the clip where Hasan is asked point blank, do we like Hezbollah or no? Now, any normal person with at least one functional brain cell would immediately say, no, we don't like Hezbollah because we don't simp for terrorists. But Hasan gives us the most Hasan answer possible. He stalls, he hedges, he dances around the question like a politician caught in a corruption scandal, and finally lands on, I don't have an issue with them. Right, no issue. The group that has slaughtered civilians by the thousands, thrown gay people off buildings, and helped Assad carry out a literal genocide in Syria. Yeah, no big deal, no biggie at all. So what's next? Is he about to tell us bin Laden was just a misunderstood political philosopher? Because actually that tracks. And then, as if it couldn't get worse, Hasan actually praises Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. I guess they share the same name, share the same mind. And I'm not talking about some surface level, he's a smart tactician comment. I'm talking about full-on, unhinged fanboy admiration. According to Hasan, Nasrallah is a brilliant leader, a deeply intellectual man who has read more books than you ever will. That's right. Forget about all the car bombings, assassinations, and mass executions. This dude is well-read, so we should cut him some slack. Little does Hasan know, Nasrallah's favorite kind of book? Romance novels, based on the love story between Muhammad and his 9-year-old bride. Anyway, Ethan then lays out exactly what this brilliant man has said about Jews, and spoiler alert, it sounds like Hitler reincarnated into a Lebanese warlord. Nasrallah openly refers to Jews as Allah's most cowardly and avaricious creatures, calls them miserly, greedy, and weak, and literally says that if the Jews gather in Israel, it'll give Hezbollah the trouble of hunting them down worldwide. Oh, but Hasan doesn't have an issue with them because, you know, they read books. So what's the defense here? Hasan tells his audience, you guys don't get it. These guys are educated. They're smart. You just think they're backwards because you're racist. Oh, okay. Got it. Being well-read and attending Western universities totally cancels out running a global terrorist network that has systematically murdered people in multiple countries. My bad, Hasan. I guess if Hezbollah ever starts a book club, we should all get on board because, hey, literacy is important. And this is Hasan's entire game. He takes the most extreme, violent, genocidal movements on the planet and tries to PR spin them into revolutionaries fighting the good fight. And he knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't outright deny Hezbollah's crimes because even Hasan knows that would make him look insane. But instead, he downplays them, deflects, and moves the goalposts until his audience is nodding along like a bunch of brain-dead NPCs. It's the same trick he pulls every time, whether it's the Houthis, Hamas, China's genocide against the Uyghurs, or now Hezbollah. He strategically omits key details and frames terrorists as righteous underdogs. And then when people push back, he just plays dumb. So Ethan lays it out. Hasan isn't just an apologist. He's an active propagandist. He takes people who should be universally condemned, slaps some pseudo-intellectual nonsense on them, and packages it to his audience as real education, when in reality, he's just lying to dumb kids who think watching Hasan counts as reading theory. And Ethan doesn't stop there. He points out how Hasan's audience eats this shit up because at this point, Hasan has radicalized them into cheering for terrorists like it's a fucking sports team. He's trained them to see the world in the dumbest, most binary way possible. America bad. Anyone else fighting America? Good. That's the depth of his analysis. Forget morality, forget history, forget nuance. If the U.S. opposes someone, they must be a misunderstood underdog hero. Let's celebrate them. Hezbollah, for example, they're just fighting against imperialism. The Houthis, they're actually Luffy from One Piece. Hamas, well, they have to slaughter civilians because something anti-colonialism. And if you question it, you're just a Zionist, fascist, or whatever else buzzword that they're using this week. So Ethan makes the point that this isn't just stupidity, it's willful, malicious manipulation. Hasan knows what he's doing. He knows he's feeding his audience a delusional black and white narrative because that's how you build a fanatical cult following. He's not educating anyone, he's manufacturing extremists. And if you think that's bad, well, we haven't even discussed Hasan's glowing coverage of Hamas. So Ethan breaks it down. Who is Hamas really? Not the sanitized, Hasan-friendly version, but the reality. They're a brutal, theocratic Islamist death cult that's been slaughtering civilians for decades, executing political opponents in the street and turning Gaza into a military base while its own people starve. These guys literally hoard humanitarian aid and sell it back to their own citizens because they'd rather let people die than stop enriching themselves. And speaking of enrichment, every single Hamas leader is a billionaire. That's right. While the average Palestinian in Gaza struggles to find food and water, their so-called resistance leaders are literally living in luxury penthouses in Qatar, stuffing their faces with Wagyu beef and making propaganda videos about jihad. But Hasan, he calls them freedom fighters. Ethan plays clips of Hasan watching Hamas propaganda and reacting like he's watching a damn Marvel trailer. We get footage of Hamas terrorists parading around with weapons, bragging about how they manufacture their own sniper rifles, and instead of offering any critique or analysis, Hasan sits there silently for almost 2 full minutes, just taking it all in like it's a sports reel on ESPN. And when he finally does open his mouth, the first thing that comes out is, "Oh, that's crazy." Yeah, no shit, Hasan, that is crazy. Crazy how you can't bring yourself to call Hamas what they are. Crazy how you watch their propaganda uncritically and just sit there nodding along like an impressed fanboy. Crazy how you can't even process any information that doesn't fit your deranged anti-West narrative. Oh, and it gets worse. Because then Ethan shows Hasan downplaying the October 7th attacks, one of the most gruesome, horrific terrorist attacks in modern history. Hasan refuses to acknowledge the scale of the atrocities. And when it comes to Hamas's mass rapes of Israeli women and girls, you know, the stuff that should instantly make any human being recoil in disgust, Hasan immediately jumps into full-blown denial mode. Ethan plays the clip where Hasan sneers at the idea that Hamas committed mass rape, dismissing the reports as hallucinations from Zionist propagandists. Never mind that we have survivor testimonies, forensic evidence, and UN reports confirming the sexual violence. Hasan just waves it away like it's some Reddit conspiracy theory. And Ethan doesn't let him off the hook. He lays out every piece of evidence we have about Hamas's sexual violence, including testimony from survivors like a 17-year-old girl who was kidnapped, held captive for weeks, and repeatedly raped by Hamas fighters. But Hasan, nothing. He just keeps repeating that it's all fake, like some brain-dead cult member who can't accept reality. And this is why Ethan is going nuclear on Hasan in the first place, because this isn't just a bad take. This is deliberate, malicious gaslighting. Hasan knows the truth. He knows the evidence is real, but he refuses to acknowledge it because he's built his entire brand around the idea that Hamas can do no wrong. And the moment he admits the truth, his entire audience will turn on him. So instead of being honest, he just doubles down on the lies, no matter how monstrous they are. And Ethan points out something even darker, that Hasan's downplaying of sexual violence is part of a larger trend from the far left. The same people who spent years screaming, "Believe all women," suddenly don't believe women if their rapists were Hamas fighters. Funny how the double standard works, right? They only try to think critically when it serves their agenda. The same people who call out misogyny in the West suddenly have nothing to say when Islamist militants are brutalizing women in Gaza. It's blatant, disgusting hypocrisy, and Hasan is one of the worst offenders. But let's be honest, that's the MO for the left. They only use virtue when it suits their purposes. Anyway, then we get the hostage situation where Hamas kidnapped civilians, including elderly people and young children, and held them in horrific conditions. Ethan pulls up the footage of hostages being released, visibly traumatized, forced to wave at their captors with literal guns pointed at them. And how does Hasan react? Bro, they look like they're chilling. Yeah, chilling, I guess. That's what we're calling hostage victims now. Hasan watches literal footage of terrorized, emaciated hostages being forced to perform for Hamas propaganda videos, and he just laughs it off like they're at summer camp. Truly disgusting. And it just keeps getting worse. Hasan then plays a Hamas propaganda video uncritically on stream, literally repeating their talking points without a single pushback. This is literal terrorism promotion, but since it's Hasan, Twitch doesn't care. Ethan rips into Twitch for banning people over dumb jokes while allowing Hasan to openly glorify terrorist organizations. And this is the moment Ethan realizes Hasan is beyond saving. He's not just an idiot. He's actively dangerous. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's lying, gaslighting, and radicalizing his audience. And worst of all, he refuses to admit when he's wrong. So what's the conclusion here? Hasan isn't just a bad political commentator. He's a terrorist sympathizer who will excuse literally anything Hamas does because he's too much of a coward to think critically. He's built an audience that worships him like a cult leader, and at this point, he's so deep in the propaganda that he probably doesn't even know what's real anymore. Next, Ethan dives into how Twitch, the biggest streaming platform in the world, somehow turned into a propaganda machine under the reign of Dan Clancy, the most spineless CEO in tech. Now, obviously, Ethan's being a little cheeky when he calls Twitch a terrorist organization, but let's be real. It's basically a megaphone for extremist propaganda at this point. And Clancy, he's just along for the ride, fumbling his way through one PR disaster after another. This man has accomplished nothing. First, he tries to slash the creator revenue split from 70-30 to 50-50, thinking no one would notice. They noticed. There was outrage. There was chaos. And guess what? He caved. Then he comes up with a genius idea to limit sponsored logos to 3% of the screen size. Another outrage, another reversal. So in the grand scheme of things, Clancy has done absolutely nothing, unless you count laying off 900 employees and not reversing that decision. But the real issue here, the thing that makes all of this go from pathetic to downright disturbing, is that Clancy is a massive Hasan Piker fanboy. No, seriously. This grown man, the CEO of Twitch, went on record saying that he loves Hasan's frankness and bluntness. Yeah, buddy. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe elevating a guy who has a meltdown every time he gets called out isn't the best move for your brand. Now, Ethan doesn't stop there. He pulls out the smoking gun, a video of Twitch staff, grown adults, being forced to sing happy birthday to Hasan Piker. And just for clarity, this isn't some random community meme. This is Dan Clancy himself, personally recording and singing along, happy birthday, dear Hasan. Happy birthday to you. Twitch is out here throwing office-wide celebrations for a millionaire streamer while the rest of their creators are scraping by on 50% revenue splits and limited ad revenue opportunities. They're never beating the Hasan runs Twitch allegations after this. And if Clancy's blatant favoritism wasn't bad enough, there's also the small matter of him being an absolute creep. Ethan rolls a tape, shows Twitch's own CEO in a corporate explainer video scrolling through Twitch clips, lingering a little too long on the wrong type of content. The kind that makes you say, my guy, you have a wife and daughters. Please put the phone down. But wait, it happens again. Another video, same issue. Dude can't even keep it together while filming a professional showcase of his own website. So what do we have so far? Dan Clancy's incompetent, he's creepy, he's running Hasan Piker fan club meetings at Twitch HQ, but what Ethan exposes next is the real kicker, the way Twitch is actively protecting extremist rhetoric while punishing anyone who calls it out. Enter Frogan, one of Hasan's main moderators. What does she do with that position? She leads the charge in calling Ethan Islamophobic for saying, don't kill civilians. Top tier discourse. This is the woman who says, no talent, no following, no impact on the platform. Yet somehow she's constantly on the Twitch homepage, constantly getting awards, constantly being elevated. Why? Your guess is as good as mine. And just in case anyone thought Ethan was exaggerating about how unhinged she is, he plays a clip. Ludwig, one of the biggest Twitch streamers, donates $10,000 to a Palestinian children's relief fund. A normal person would think, oh, that's such a nice thing to do. Frogan? Nope. Not good enough. She goes on stream angrily, saying that unless you pass her ideological purity test, she doesn't even want your money. Keep your little chump change, she sneers. Imagine being so up your own ass that you tell starving children in a war zone, sorry kids, this money isn't clean enough. And it only gets worse. Ethan pulls another clip, this time Frogan saying she has zero pity for soldiers with PTSD. She hopes they come home and get no health insurance, no benefits, nothing. Then the next day, after people obviously start calling her out, she goes live and plays the clip while laughing, saying, yeah, I still stand by that. Based. Ethan points out the obvious. She only has this level of smug defiance because Twitch will never punish her. Veterans are literally a protected group under Twitch's community guidelines, but rules don't apply when you're on the right side of their ideological echo chamber. And then there's the 9/11 cake. Yes, the 9/11 cake. Frogan, Twitch's golden child, openly planned a baking stream where she was going to recreate the Twin Towers out of cake and crash a little plane into them. Oh, and when did she tweet this? The morning of October 7th, while Israeli families were calling news stations begging for help. Frogan was cracking jokes about 9/11. But don't worry, Twitch has a solution. Instead of banning her, they gave her an award. And not just any award, a legendary woman in gaming award, which gave her front page placement all year long. This is the same woman who, despite streaming to 100 people, somehow managed to get nominated for Rising Star 2 years in a row. But that's not the worst part. Twitch didn't just protect Frogan, they went full mask off. Ethan reveals that for an entire year, Twitch secretly blocked every single Israeli from creating an account. No announcement, no explanation, just quietly banning an entire country from using the platform. Ethan placed clips from Israeli streamers who literally had to prove with back-end code that Twitch was blacklisting Israel. And when they tried to report it, Twitch support deleted their tickets with no response. Then when Twitch finally got caught, Dan Clancy banned anyone who asked about it. Someone asked, Do you plan to address the anti-Semitism problem? Permaban. Why do you allow terrorist propaganda? Permaban. This man saw his entire company get exposed for blacklisting Jews, and his first instinct was to start swinging the ban hammer. And just when you think it can't get worse, Ethan drops another bomb. Twitch's head of policy and community guidelines was literally fired from the British government for being too anti-Zionist. This is the person deciding what is and isn't hate speech on Twitch. And guess where she landed immediately afterwards? Ethan reveals it was Twitch HQ. Ethan then goes through a timeline showing that Twitch spends a year quietly banning Jews from their platform. Then, as soon as they're caught, they quietly unban Sneeko, Myron from Fresh and Fit, and Hasan's little Houthi twink. All back, all at once. Wonder what that means. Anyway, at this point, Ethan doesn't even need to make a closing argument. The evidence is overwhelming. Twitch isn't just protecting extremists, it's run by them. Dan Clancy isn't just an incompetent CEO, he's actively fostering an environment where this stuff flourishes. And Hasan Piker, he's just the lucky golden boy who gets the benefit from it all. Ethan then closes out the video with one simple conclusion. After months of research, after sifting through endless clips, after proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Twitch has a massive problem with platforming extremism, he's left with only one thing to say. He says, "Fuck this dude," to his former co-host. At the end of the day, Ethan's video exposing Hasan is a case study in the inevitable self-destruction of progressivism, a movement built on ever-changing goalposts, purity tests, and an insatiable hunger for radicalism. It's not about progress, it's about perpetual revolution, and when radical change is the only principle, the movement will eventually consume itself. The same people who once stood side by side in their crusade against the so-called oppressors inevitably turn on each other, cannibalizing their own movement. Hasan Piker spent years fostering an audience of hyper-radicalized extremist leftists, using his platform to promote the idea that America is a source of all evil in the world, that capitalism is oppression, and that anyone who supports American values is a bootlicking reactionary. But now he's trapped by the very movement he helped radicalize. He can't disavow the extremists without exposing himself as a fraud, so he has to keep up with the ever-escalating demands of the left in order to avoid alienating the fanatical fan base that funds his lavish lifestyle. On the other side of the spectrum, Ethan is realizing the hard way that the left never stops moving. He stayed in place, but the tide kept pushing further, and suddenly he's the one out of step. The mob he helped create is turning on him because in the endless race to be the most radical, the most extreme, the most revolutionary, yesterday's progressives become today's reactionaries. All in all, Ethan does a remarkably thorough job of dismantling Hasan, exposing him as an unprincipled, ideologically incoherent propagandist. Hasan built his entire career on calling out hypocrisy, yet every accusation he hurls at others applies to him tenfold. The funniest part is that Ethan's video ends up as a cautionary tale for leftist coalitions. No matter how united they may seem, they will inevitably turn on each other. And now, after years of pushing progressive narratives, Ethan himself is being labeled right-wing by the very radicals he once pandered to. Why? Because he had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be defending literal terrorists. Imagine that. This is ultimately why progressivism is a con. It's not about building a better society. It's about perpetual moral panic and the constant demand for more radical action. And that's why it will always implode on itself. The left cannot stop itself from pushing further and further because the moment they stop, they risk being labeled reactionary or fascist by their own movement. And we're witnessing Ethan learn this in real time. No matter how progressive you think you are, there will always be someone more radical, more insane, and they will come for you eventually. On a broader spectrum, Twitch has played an undeniable role in radicalizing a generation to hate America. Whether it's international viewers who already have ingrained anti-American sentiments or American youth who've been spoon-fed a distorted view of their own country, Twitch has fostered an environment where resentment against the United States is not just tolerated but actively encouraged. It's no coincidence that the most prominent political figures on the platform are overwhelmingly aligned with radical leftist ideology. These are influencers who peddle a revisionist history of America, blame every global problem on Western civilization, and glorify regimes and organizations that actively seek to destroy the very freedoms they exploit. Now, I have to assume that outside of a profound misunderstanding of history, a major reason so many young Americans have fallen for this anti-American rhetoric is because they've never actually experienced life outside of the United States. They've never lived under a socialist or authoritarian regime. They've never seen firsthand how restrictive, corrupt, and oppressive many of these governments are. They take their freedoms for granted because They don't know what it's like to be without them. Meanwhile, Twitch continues to amplify this misinformation, propping up voices like Hasan Piker, who constantly paint America as the root of all evil while ignoring or excusing the atrocities committed by the regimes he sympathizes with. If you're a young, impressionable Twitch user and every time you log in, you see Hasan's face on the front page spewing half-baked Marxist nonsense, it's easy to assume his perspective is the correct one, especially when Twitch suppresses or refuses to elevate any alternative views. This is why Twitch's role in all of this is so insidious. Platforms like Twitch don't need to outright ban Hasan's rhetoric, but they absolutely should not be elevating it as if it's some unquestionable truth. If Twitch truly wanted to be a neutral platform, they would allow all viewpoints to be represented fairly. Instead, they have repeatedly shown that they are willing to give preferential treatment to extremist, radical, leftist views while suppressing any meaningful opposition. By featuring Hasan's content on their front page, they're making a clear political statement, one that tells their audience that this perspective carries institutional weight. That added authority is what makes his influence so dangerous. If Twitch wants to be taken seriously as a platform, they should stop playing favorites, stop treating political radicals like thought leaders, and start holding all content to the same standard. Otherwise, they're not just enabling the problem, they're actively fueling it. That being said, I reject any premise that people like Hasan should be deplatformed. Unlike the left, which routinely calls for censorship and the silencing of political opponents, I actually believe in free speech. I believe that the way to fight bad speech and bad ideas is with better speech. Hasan's ideas may appear to have traction now, but the more he is fact-checked, exposed, and held accountable for his dishonesty, the weaker his influence will become. We've seen this happen before. The mainstream media spent years lying about Trump, twisting narratives, and burying their credibility in the process. The more they doubled down, the more people started to see through their illusion. Their viewership tanked, their trust ratings plummeted, and many of their institutions are now barely surviving. Hasan operates in a similar way. He thrives on dishonesty, partisanship, and propaganda. But no one can lie to the public indefinitely without eventually giving them a reason to stop believing in them. The irony in all this is that everything Hasan despises, capitalism, American democracy, religious freedom, individual liberty, are the exact things that make America the greatest country in the world. The reason the places he holds water for are shitholes is precisely because they reject those values. They're not suffering because of American imperialism or Western interference. They're suffering because of failed ideologies, oppressive governments, and cultures that reject the very freedoms we take for granted. America is the greatest country in the world. It stands as the ultimate model of a successful civilization built on the foundation of individual liberty, capitalism, and Christian values. The very principles that create stability, economic opportunity, and moral clarity. Hasan and his ilk love to cry about oppression, but where else on earth could a guy like him sit in his multi-million-dollar mansion trashing the country that made him rich without any consequences? Try pulling that stunt in, let's say, Iran or Gaza or any of the authoritarian hellholes he admires so much. He wouldn't last a day. At the end of the day, this isn't just about Hasan Piker or Twitch. It's about the broader system that props up radicals, rewards dishonesty, and shields itself from scrutiny. The people screaming the loudest about oppression are always the ones given the biggest platforms. The same institutions that claim to champion diversity and free discourse work overtime to silence anything that challenges their narrative. Why? Because dissent isn't dangerous to them because it's wrong. It's dangerous because it might be right. The moment people start thinking critically, the entire house of cards collapses. So the real question is, are you being told the truth, or are you being fed reality designed to keep you compliant, outraged, and easy to manipulate? Because if they had to lie to convince you, maybe you were never supposed to believe them in the first place. Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.